Millennials and Gen Xers are raising Gen Alpha, or the iPad kid generation as we've been calling them, and so far as we've seen, they're kind of a terrifying generation to work with. Their behavior is so out of control that we are seeing reports of lifetime teachers and childcare workers just up and quitting their jobs because they don't know how to handle these kids. And today I want to talk about the issue with the iPad generation, or Gen Alpha. Hi, I'm Andrea, I'm a Gen Z. You may know me from TikTok, where I make commentary videos and I have millions and millions of views, but today I've decided to take my content over to YouTube for the first time ever, so bear with me here. What's my credibility in this area? Well, I did nanny and do childcare for about 7 to 10 years, depending on how you want to slice it. And I was an education major for a single semester before I saw the light and left. For starters, let's define Generation Alpha. Depending on where you reference it, Generation Alpha is roughly anyone who's born between the years of 2010 and 2025. And that means that the new generation is actually going to start to be born in the next few years. I think it's also important to note that a lot of people argue that Gen Z are iPad kids, but Gen Z are not iPad kids. The age range for Gen Z is 1997 to around 2012 or 2015, again, wherever you decide this Gen Alpha starts. And iPads were invented in 2010, and they weren't really publicly accessible and available at a reasonable price. So Gen Z can't be iPad babies if iPads weren't around when we were babies. Although with every generation, there was some overlap at the end of it with the other generations. Totally valid and fair argument. Okay, first we'll start with this video from Gabe SCO. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I will tag them and see if they have a YouTube to tag as well. Because we're all about giving full credit to our creators here.
I need everybody else in my generation to promise that we are not going to raise iPad children. Please. I just saw a TikTok from some millennial, and she was like, here's a message to Gen Z. You might make fun of us, but watch out. We're raising the next generation, and they're going to eat you up. Your kids can't read, okay? You're raising Gen Alpha. They're bizarre and terribly behaved. Y'all bred iPad children. You have been shoving media and screens in these kids' faces since birth. They probably have no imagination because their brain.
I want to point out the imagination part is such a huge thing I keep seeing, and it's so sad. It is so sad to see these kids just dependent on these iPads.
Brain hasn't actually been forced to come up with any original thought. Gen Z, please, when we are older, don't give your kids iPads at the dinner table.
I want to dispute that point right there. When you're out at dinner, an iPad for a kid who's throwing a tantrum in public is a perfectly fine thing, because odds are you're not going out to dinner that often. But other than that, I completely agree with everything they're saying so far.
If I'm older and I have my kids and I bring them to a restaurant and I see fellow parents at the table next to me and their kids have iPads at a restaurant in public, I'm gonna scream. Because what the hell is that?
That's called making sure your kid doesn't throw a tantrum in public. This is where the guy lost me. Just because you see someone who has an iPad in public, that doesn't mean their kids are on that iPad 24/7. iPad is what the lead pad was to our generation. We'll get into all this later, don't worry.
Can you not make your child behave for more than 5 seconds that they can live without an iPad for dinner? Can you not give your child enough attention and actually converse with them and teach them things and have conversations? Why do you have to just give them an iPad to make them shut up? Why are they even there then? What are you doing? What is your parenting style? People are gonna come at me and be like, oh, you're 21. What do you know about being a parent? I don't know. I look at kids and they're terribly behaved. I saw a TikTok of a girl talking about how she was a summer camp for
Okay, I think that we've seen enough from this here, so let's move on to my response video. But this was a very bold take from a kid who has never had to try and deal with children in a restaurant situation where you're trying not to bug other people.
To promise that we are not going to raise iPad children, please.
As a Gen Z who majored in education for 1 semester and worked in childcare for about 8 or 9 years, and who has many younger relatives, I think I speak for many of us when I say that Gen Alpha, or the iPad kid generation, is so far an absolute terrifying nightmare to deal with. And I want to talk about this today. And I know people say this about every young generation, it's kind of like a rite of passage for aging, but it is an epidemic to the point where teachers who have taught their entire lives are just up and quitting their jobs now because they can't handle these kids anymore. And yes, of course, there are other issues like benefits and pay, but the main reason when polled for most teachers is the children's behavior of recent years. Main issues we're finding with Gen Alpha, which to be clear was born between 2010 and 2025, and most of their parents are either millennials or Gen Xers, is that they're having extreme social issues and they have little to no mannerisms. I got roasted on this one, okay? I mix up words a lot. I know that mannerisms wasn't the right word to use there, okay? I meant manners, and you know that. You can deduce that. The iPad kids are out of control. I'm not lying when I tell you, as someone who used to nanny for a lot of families, I have some crazy stories, but the families that were the easiest to manage were the families that extremely controlled screen time for their kids. I think a big issue is that these kids are using screens at a rate we've never historically seen before, and these parents are replacing like parenting and babysitters with iPads. Like, even Gen Z didn't have this level of access to the internet quite. And we all know that all this screen time is bad for everyone in society, but we're directly seeing that in things like this generation as a whole is having reduced attention span and concentration. So that might be why like ADHD diagnoses seem to be going up and up. To clarify, this statement upset a lot of people. I meant overdiagnoses are going up and up. I know that proper diagnoses are also rising for women and those things, but it is a true statistic that like we have historically overdiagnosed people with ADHD, and so this might be like part of the reason we see that happening. They spend less time socializing in person, and this one I've seen the most with the kids in my life is less development of creativity and imagination. The kids I've watched over the years have no interest in coloring and building, and they just want to sit on their iPads and watch Netflix and play apps and games. The worst families I ever had to nanny for were the families that allowed their kid like unregulated access to their iPads and whatnot because they just wanted to be on those 24/7, and it was a nightmare. These kids didn't want to go and play outside, they didn't do a lot of imagination play, and they never wanted to go and play with toys, they just wanted to sit and play on their apps. And I would watch them play on the apps just to see if it was really all that bad, but there was really like no creativity happening on those apps. And terrifyingly enough, if you tried to take this tech from these kids, they didn't know how to act. And I could always tell when a parent didn't have proper boundaries or anything, because if you try and take an iPad out of an iPad kid's hand, not only will they throw a tantrum so large, but they will start physically hitting you. And the first few times this happened whilst I was nannying families, I was amazed because like, who allows their kid to behave like this? Even as a child who would throw temper tantrums, like I knew that you would never put your hands on someone who at least wasn't immediate family. There were some kids that had no problem even straight up hitting me in my face. And I think a lot of the millennials that I work for really liked having me as a nanny because I would slowly try and like infiltrate my parenting style into their lives because I was around the family so much. Specifically, every day when one family came home from school, one was like 5 and the other was about 7, so they didn't really have homework ever. I would take all of the... Now granted, they did have some homework, but it was very menial, like they could do it in 15 minutes or so, and we would always get to it, okay? But yes, grade school doesn't have that much homework, and preschool almost never had any. Electronics and put it away, and tantrums would start. And I'd say, that's fine, let it all out, let it all happen, do what you need to do here. But if it was a nice day out, I'd be like, okay, let's go outside. We'd all go outside, I would close and lock the door behind us. Now granted, the kids knew how to unlock the door, okay? The locking of the door was just a formality. If there was an actual emergency, those kids would be able to get back inside anyways. It was just sort of like a deterrent. Like if they went up and they were trying to sneak inside to go watch TV or something, I would catch them for a second wiggling the lock. I am not just locking kids outside, okay? Calm down, Cheryl. Tell them, go play. You have tons of outdoor toys that you literally never touch. Or if it was cold outside, usually these kids had entire playrooms that went completely untouched because of these iPads. And I'd say, go play with your toys in the playroom. You have hundreds of toys, go and play with them. You will find something to do, I promise. And in 3 or 4 hours, when your parents are home, you get all of your tech back because they don't care. And yes, usually I would allow like 20 or 30 minutes of TV time after school sometimes to allow them to wind down and relax, because everyone needs to relax after a long day at work. Other than that, iPad games and movie nights were things that had to be earned by doing little chores or just helping out around the house, like every other family who was raised in the 90s and early 2000s would have done it. And if I was with the family long enough, I genuinely started to see improvements with the children to the point where the parents would see it too. And a few times in passing, I had parents be like, what are you doing? Like, they seem to just be behaving better. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm raising your kids. Like, I'm teaching them about actions and consequences and how to handle their emotions properly. And listen, I'm all for handing a kid an iPad when you're out in public at lunch or whatever to coddle a public meltdown. Because you know what? We had these. This is what my mom would bring us to kind of babysit us when she's out in public, just trying to have a lunch with her friends. But this is not a 24/7 replacement for raising your child. So you know what? When I have kids, when Gen Z has kids, we're going on eBay, we're getting the 1998 LeapPad learning system. But I also think it's important to note that it's not the iPad's fault that kids are turning out this way. Historically, we've always blamed tech for issues in our children. At the end of the day, it is the parenting style and approach, or lack thereof, to blame, really. I'm not trying to mom shame or say this is easy, but we can do this. This has gotten out of hand. I think the last part of the video was the most important. We are blaming the electronics here, but at the end of the day, it's really the parenting and the parenting styles that are to blame. Kids need some regulation. They cannot just be sitting full time on these iPads. Like, granted, someday if I decide to have a children, I might buy them an iPad because like Leap pads just aren't available anymore. It was a joke, okay? But that doesn't mean I'm gonna let them sit on it 24 hours a day. Regulation is so important in these instances. But I have to disagree with the original creator. I think it's so fine for a kid to have an iPad in a restaurant because that's definitely just like a temporary minor situation. It's just a public distraction to stop your kid from having a full-blown meltdown in a restaurant. Like, this just shows me that that creator's never actually tried to take out little kids to a restaurant and make them sit for more than like 45 minutes, because you know what, kids max out at about a half an hour. Like, you blow through those coloring sheets at about 20 minutes in, and then there's only so much hangman and whatnot you can do beyond that. And if you're really little, you don't know how to do hangman and that stuff. And every once in a blue moon, my mother would go out to lunch with her friends, right? And she'd have to bring me or my sister or whoever was there. And she wanted to spend like an hour or two gabbing with her friends there. But all of her friends had children that were in school or like college, and we were too little to be in school. So it was totally fine that she handed us the Leap pad in those situations to distract us, because that was a very temporary situation. But yeah, overall, I think there's definitely a very interesting pattern and international outcry over Gen Alpha and like the millennial parenting style. So let me know what you guys think, and more importantly, let me know what you guys want me to comment on and like what you want my opinions on. Because if you know my content, you know that I have a ton of other commentary videos to make for this YouTube channel. So if it goes well, I will definitely keep churning these out for you, but you have to let me know what you want. If you like it, if you dislike it, I don't know. Maybe if you dislike it, keep it to yourself. But anyways, yeah, have a little leeway with me because this is my first YouTube video. I don't even know how to edit YouTube videos yet, so that'll be an interesting experience. I'm sorry it's taking me so long to get these out to you, but yeah. As always, thank you guys so much for everything, and I love you so much, and I will see you very soon, of course, if you let me know what you want to see.